I'm going to bring out somebody who's going to introduce our keynote speaker that I'm very excited to hear speak. So please put your hands together for the Director of Business Policy at DGC, Dave Forget. That's for you, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being excited about hearing me speak. I've kind of an easy job today just to introduce Colin, but maybe just start by giving a little bit of context. I read two articles recently. The first was kind of a summary of the Sundance Festival, and it's ground zero for independent film. And I was reading about the long list of films that sold this year, and two things struck me. One was the sheer volume of films and the amounts that were being paid. And the second was the diversity of buyers. All the usual distributors were there, but I think it was 12 films I counted were licensed by Amazon or Netflix. So I think that's a pretty good indication of things changing. And then the second article I read, almost within a few days later, talked about Berlin, and it was on the same topic. But the headline of the article was, U.S. theatrical distribution is more than ever a key to success for independent films. So, you'd be forgiven for getting a bit of whiplash. On the one hand, we're told everything is changing, and on the other hand, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So we've been thinking a lot about this sort of thing, as I'm sure many people in the industry are. And to that end, at the DGC, we hosted a one-day session for members back in November that we called The Future of the Feature. And we talked about production, distribution, marketing, all the usual topics. And not surprisingly, we invited speakers to come in and give us their sense of the landscape, the Canadian landscape. And so in thinking about what's happening out there, it occurred to us that it might be the natural evolution in this to go to the next level and say, what's happening globally? And how does Canada fit in as a producing nation in that? And so we looked around, and we're really pleased to be able to have Colin Brown with us today. Colin has an extensive background. I guess you probably saw his bio. We think that it's a good person who, by the way, just as an anecdote, he teaches a course at NYU called The Future of Film. So we thought, this is more than just a coincidence. So I got on the phone with Colin. We had a really nice conversation, and I took a look at the syllabus for the course and the type of thing he's been talking about, and asked him if it was possible to reduce his 13-week course into 45 minutes, which is what he's going to try to do. So on that note, just before I introduce him, just a quick thank you. This is the first time that the Academy has put together this type of event as a sort of a screen directed at the industry as part of the celebrations for Canadian Screen Week. At DGC, we're really happy to be part of it and participate and congratulate them. I think it's been a great day. And thank you all for coming. I hear that the event was sold out, and many of you have stuck around for the last panel, which is great, because there's a drink coming after. That's what you're waiting for. So with that in mind, because I always do what Karen tells me, with that in mind, please join me in welcoming Colin Brown.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to thank Dave Forget for inviting me. It's a privilege to come here. I'm also honored to be the support act for the drinks next, so I'm very, very happy to kill 45 minutes for you. And also wanted to thank my favorite producer, Jan Nathanson, who is the one who recommended me to Dave, so thank you. It's great to have a support group here. So this is, a small topic, right? So not only am I going to talk about the future of the feature, but going to talk about it on a global level, all in 45 minutes. So obviously, I'm not going to answer everything, and you're just going to get essentially a mosaic of the world as I see it. I kind of feel like I should have worn one of those red caps baseball caps that says, make the film business great again, And the fact that you know that reference is one of the things I'm going to be talking about, because I wonder if what Justin wears would be so well known around the rest of the world. It will be, and it should be. So I've got this thing. I'll try not to be too far away so you can still hear me. So while we talk about politics, I want to sort of reference that too, because in reading the coverage, we're all gripped right now with the US election. And I read a commentary the other day as to explaining the anger that Americans on both sides of the aisle feel. And it was an interesting commentary. It's actually by a right-center person, but I actually thought he nailed it. He came up with 4 trends that have impacted the economy. One was that technology is displacing workers. Globalization is dampening wages. The social structure has atomized and frayed. And demography, the demographics are shifting. I was reading that and said, well, that's a pretty good description of the film industry on a global level. All those factors are also at play, and you're probably in this paradoxical situation, if you're filmmakers in this room, of reading how the global market is exploding globally, but not feeling it in your daily lives. It feels harder to get films made, and yet you keep reading about the opportunities. And I'm going to examine that paradox more fully, because it's an interesting one. And at the end, I'm going to wheel back to Canada and see how the Canadian independent film industry fits into that picture. Because I do think it has a role that perhaps, looking from the outside, it hasn't fully taken advantage of. So, quick picture. When I say giant global opportunities, it is. I mean, on a macro level, this is the size of the industry that you're in. So, and it's growing. I mean, that's the interesting thing. You're in the right business right now. I mean, it's 5% compound annual growth rate, $2.23 trillion by 2019. It's already 1.75 now. Global entertainment media revenues. That's how much people around the world, it's estimated, are spending watching stuff, entertainment media. Now, it's also important to know the context in which video is in that, because you hear it, and by the way, I'm going to throw in lots and lots of figures, very sexy, but but they're important, but I don't want you to, as I say, it's a mosaic. I'm just using it to back up points. So what's interesting about this chart, if you go and analyze it in great detail, is that as big as video games are, for instance, 3 times as much money is spent watching video at home than playing video games. And 6 times that amount is actually spent on subscribing to broadband. So, think that through. Here's the worldview from in cinema and in-home entertainment. And you get the sense of how it's all playing out. I know in this room, you're going to think, wait a minute, you just put USA. It should be North America, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But 3 regional hubs of about equal size are at play right now, and the other ones will catch up. One of the reasons it will catch up is, this is a look at wealth levels around the world, and the redder it is on this is where the wealth currently is, and orange is the next level, and so on. That map is slowly going to green, slowly going to go orange, slowly going to go red. And why is that relevant? Well, when there's wealth levels up, and by the way, in the next few years, there'll be 18 million millionaires around the world. That's 3 times the population of New York City. When wealth goes up, 2 things happen. Disposable income gets spent on entertainment, and people invest in entertainment. So the opportunities are opening up on a macro level. This is an interesting picture to me. Sorry. And by the way, I have a horrible cough, so if you hear that, please forgive me, but I've got lozenges. This is a picture of production around the world. And this is 2011. It's actually the last time anyone did any serious analysis of this. This is a UNESCO picture. I prefer this one. There was another one that was done by an analyst research company in London called Screen Digest, and they came up with a figure of about just under 6,000. They came up with a figure of 7,233. The big discrepancy there is how you determine Nigeria. You see Nigeria there? Depending on the year, on any given year, Nigeria comes pretty close to making as many films as India does. It's just that they don't get seen in theaters yet. They're actually backing into theaters. They're made very quickly, and there are lots of them, without government support, by the way. But that's only a fraction of actually the features that get made. And how do we know this? Well, every year, the Sundance Film Festival gets 4,000 feature film submissions. That's just to Sundance. When there was a service called B-Side Entertainment, which went bust, but it tracked films that were submitted to festivals. One year, before they went bust, they tracked 50,000 trying to submit to festivals. Now, in other words, 50,000 films. Now, only a fraction of them are ones you'd ever see or get to know about, and they're probably mostly seen by their mothers, if they're lucky. So, quick survey of the world. I've whipped through these, but I just want to get a sense of where we fit in. So this is cinema emissions per person by country. You'll see why this is relevant in a minute. You get, the redder it is, the darker it is. No black, but check out Iceland, right? Top country in the world. Nothing else to do there. No, that's not true. Number of cinema screens by country. You see that China is catching up fast compared to the US. And this was a snapshot a while ago. These figures have been updated. I'll come back there in a minute. And India also catching up. But the interesting thing about India is that most of those cinemas are family-owned local houses. The multiplex revolution has not really hit India yet. When it does, just wait. Cinema admissions by country, one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it. I mentioned India, look at that. The fact that India doesn't really show up in box office figures just tells you how little people pay for tickets, right? Number of cinema admissions per person by country, latest available year. Starts evening out. So, let's start looking at three of the most popular films of all time. And the reason I bring these up is they all tell a story about where the market is headed. So, at any given year, hang on. Yep, sorry. So I'm going to pick the three, Titanic, Avatar, Star Wars. It shows they are the three most successful films so far of all time. They show the ceiling of what is possible in any given year, but they also tell you a story about why films play differently in different places. And I want you to check this out. So Titanic, see there, US and Canada, 35% of the world. Europe, if you add it all together, is actually just marginally bigger, and then the rest of the world shared it. Asia is 18%. Interesting enough, though, Japan was by far, outside the US, was by far its best territory. $200 million was spent on tickets watching Titanic. And actually, $200 million was spent watching Titanic again and again and again. Just as a reference point, China was 43 million that year. Germany, France, UK also did well, and so did Brazil. So, Avatar. Picture starts changing. Quickly go back. So the US, 35. US and Canada shrinking a little bit. European Union growing a little bit, and it's combined 40%. Rest of Europe is the growth bit, the non-EU. and Asia is starting to flex its muscle. Here's the change. So the big success stories there were France, 176, Germany, UK, Russia, barely figured before, now it's 117 million. Spain did well. Australia, bizarrely, did 106 million. Loved Avatar. South Korea, 105. Blew people's socks off then. But then China, suddenly, remember 43? Now it's 204 million. The map is changing. Japan slipped down, 171. Japanese people did not like Avatar nearly as much as Titanic. Now let's fast forward to right now. Interesting, huh? Just as you expect the map to be redrawn, it's actually sort of gone back in time. So US-Canada is 45%. And by far the biggest territory outside North America, by far the biggest was the UK, 176 million. So not even the high watermark of the other films. Germany's 107, China 125. Hasn't really worked the way that people thought. In fact, but here's the weird thing. Star Wars outperformed Avatar in the following places: Venezuela, Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Philippines, and Finland. Films do not play the same way around the world, and this is important. So, where would you put your money in the future? This is the global population by region as of today. 58% of the planet lives in Asia, and US and Canada, 5%. Okay? But within that, it is a mistake to make assumptions about what works. Okay, so I want to show you an example, and it's a film that, how many people saw Kingsman? Yeah, a lot, okay. So there it is, estimated production budget, 81 million. It did, North America, it made 31% of its money, a third. International, 69%. That's pretty much what you'd expect these days. Twice as much internationally as the US or North America. But think about what that film was, right? Where would you expect it to do well? Sorry, I've given it away. Before I get to that chart, the territories you would expect to do well, and in fact, it was marketed that way, were, well, the UK. Australia often mirrors the UK, so UK did 24 million, Australia 14, Russia almost as much as Australia, that was a good performance, and France 11. Didn't really do well elsewhere, but respectable. But here's the thing, so remember UK 24. All right, South Korea, 47 million. Did twice as much money in South Korea as it did in the UK with a British actor, okay? Obviously, you see the poster, everything's marketed slightly differently. China, also, 75 million. And here's the interesting thing, as you can see. Between Taiwan, Malaysia, Japan, India, Thailand, and those countries, if you add those up, those territories exceeded North America and the UK for a film that was made for North America and the UK. I'm fascinated by this, because look at the contrast in the marketing. So this is the North American marketing campaign. Colin Firth has a gun, and Samuel Jackson has a gun. Colin Firth is in the middle. Colin Firth has the umbrella for Asia, and Samuel Jackson is in the middle, thinking. Mark Strong's gun is much smaller. Obviously, the one Asian character that they wanted to highlight was much more central. But interesting, so they didn't play the action card. And why are we surprised? So I saw this the other day, fascinated by this. So this is an approximate thing. Somebody had tracked, it's probably imprecise, they tracked what people watch in different states in the US. And every state has a different show that is their favorite show. And some of them are regionally based. So you probably guess that Texas would be Narcos. And New Jersey Boardwalk Empire, well, obviously local. Game of Thrones in Massachusetts, who knew? It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, of course, in Pennsylvania, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Portlandia, surprise, in Oregon, da-da-da-da. But look at that. Every one, as far as I know, Nashville, of course, in Tennessee. We'll come back to this because actually having something rooted in your place matters. People love seeing their own stories, their own cities, their own people on the screen. So let's start talking about China. And actually, I'm going to use this as a springboard because China is not really the story. It's one story that's happening, but it's, you know. So right now, so this film, Mermaids, it's only been on release for about 2.5 weeks, maybe 3 now. It's already in China, has taken $510 million. A low budget-ish Hong Kong director, comedy, you know, but he, you know, a lot of the Hong Kong talent are moving to China to make their films there. This worked, 510 million. But the weird thing is that it was released in opposition to 2 other films, and they are The Monkey King 2 and From Vegas to Macau 3. So, you know, China is copying the Hollywood template there, franchises. Collectively, they've taken $1 billion in China alone, okay? And just to give you a sense of what's happening there, every day in China, 15 more screens are opening, cinema screens in China, right now, okay? And, you know, we're seeing its effect on productions. So Kung Fu Panda 3, for instance, was shot in 2 different versions. You know, a Mandarin version, an English version. They're subtly different. The jokes are different. But this is the one that really gets me. And this is, you know, I had a lot of fun with this. So a few years ago, I used to be a trade journalist. One of the other papers had a list of 13 hottest emerging box office territories. And there they are. I don't know if you can see them, but you know, it's Egypt, Colombia, Ecuador, South Africa, Oman, UAE, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Taiwan, Vietnam, and Thailand. So now, in some cases, they're small countries that had plenty of room to grow. So it wasn't a giant leap that they went 50% up 1 year. Others, less so. Anyway, at the time, these were the fastest growing territories, all right? Their combined population, as of today, is over 800 million people, okay? But here's the thing. None of these countries really show up in the industry grid. And what do I mean by that? If you're selling a film overseas, you know, you are not thinking to sell to these territories. In fact, I'm not even sure you can necessarily. You're not finding distributors in these, apart from, so if you're selling to Egypt, you're probably selling all Arab rights, and they'll be lumped in with the UAE and Oman. South Africa, yes, you probably would. Although I think now because it's so TV-driven, you're looking at African rights. Colombia and Ecuador, for sure. But there are a lot of Latin American players buy the whole thing, all right? And they're really buying it, you think, for Brazil and Argentina. And sometimes Mexico, sometimes separate. And these other territories, you're not pre-selling to Indonesia or Malaysia or Philippines. You may, Singapore used to be, and is Hong Kong? No. So Singapore used to be a separate territory, but it's lumped together now. As far as the industry is concerned, these places are off the grid. They're not meaningful, right? But you saw that picture I painted of China. What happens if the same forces that are happening in China and in Europe and in North America start happening in these places? And here's the interesting thing. Right now, those 13 countries, their combined box office, respectable, is about 1.675 billion. You can see it at the top. But if the ticket prices match the US, you know, a ways to go, it jumps up 58%. If the screen density matched China today, it gets to 3.8 billion, and so on. If admissions matched the EU, which, by the way, is not a huge target, you know, they're complaining in Europe that admissions are going down. You know, so it's not, you know, that's the figure that's most interests me, 5.5. The other ones are kind of fanciful because the UK is, you know, is famously highly screened. But if it matched that, these places, 11 billion, and if it ever matched North America, North America, which most of it is US because the screen density is not that high in Canada, we're looking at a box office from these 13 territories that don't matter being $21 billion. The North American box office last year was 11, you know. So this is the world that I'm interested in. And by the way, I haven't even talked about India. I mentioned before. That's the sleeping giant, and Nigeria, another sleeping giant. And here's an interesting, in case you're thinking, they're not going to go to build theaters. Nobody, you know, they're going to bypass technology. They're going to watch things on their phone. That's what happens in emerging territories. Actually, it's not true. They might be watching it on the phone, but the amount of money they're going to spend on films at theaters, right now, it's going up. It's crossing. Last year, just about, so we've already crossed. We're now at the inflection point. More money actually comes out of theaters for films than it does from in-home entertainment. In contrast to 2008. I mean, you know, so now you may think that makes no sense, but actually, in the old days, of course, we remember the days when, you know, video cassettes and DVDs, high margin businesses being replaced by digital. So it's not a reflection of volume, it's a reflection of cost, price. And right now, this is where the money is being made, and it's growing. Other territories. So these are the fastest growing emerging economies. Again, sleeping giants. We know about China. I mentioned Nigeria, Philippines on that match, on that picture for Bangladesh, not to be underestimated. Bangladesh has a slight, and Pakistan has a slight issue that Canada does with the US, which is that people latch onto India and they forget about Bangladesh and Pakistan. Emerging sleeping giants. But I've always wanted to show a picture of that. The optics on the film industry are not great. So, you know, there's a world of opportunities, but the business side of it, the image of the business is awful. That's what people think. Hey, I'm working in the film business. Really? Why is that? What is wrong with the film business, perceptually, given what I've just shown you? You would think, with all the previous things, that people would say, this is fantastic. This is what a wonderful business. No. Everyone says, this sucks. Why? Why? Well, let's have a look. I was really struck. There was a really interesting article, as only the New Yorker can do, I think, a profile of a company called SDX, which I'll be coming back to. SDX, a new studio, trying to do things differently in the US. Surprise, surprise, wrote a business model, engineered to get Chinese money. But the article went into great depth and examined all this. And I was really struck by this quote. It's a little off the thing, but so movies may not have gotten better over the years, but they've gotten more satisfying. Okay? A generation ago, execs made movies that they wanted to see. Kramer and Kramer was a really good movie. And by the way, that's not a high bar, right? I mean, if you actually go back in time, if Kramer and Kramer is a really good movie, but anyway, it's decent, right? But it's not satisfying a global audience, whereas the Harry Potter series and Lord of the Rings trilogy weren't great movies, but they were very satisfying. So the Hollywood business is in the satisfaction business, and they've got that down to an art. But even that art plays differently around the world, okay? So that's one issue. It's unpredictable. But the studios are gaming the system and doing rather well. Not interested in making great movies, interested in making movies that people want to see or feel a sense of satisfaction, at least temporarily. Other factors. I'm sure everyone has felt this in this room, or you're working in television anyway. There's an existential threat from television. Here we go. And you know what? It's always been that way. So, so once cinematic sex and violence, complete with dragons, are available on your phone, why pay a babysitter to drive to a mall to see them? Good question. Good question. But this is something that cinema has been facing forever, ever since the arrival of television, which is, it's a very easy to consume thing, and the production values and the stories telling is getting better. So how do you compete with that? Well, I would argue that you do more than just satisfy. You have to actually make good movies, and and very precise movies and offer things that you cannot see in other environments. Interesting enough, and I put this slide up, in some ways, everyone's looking at film and TV as competitive. Film is becoming television. And the best example of a TV series is this. Look at this. This is the pilot for a show that comes on every 2 years. It's just that the pilot costs 150 million. And you get to see all the different characters, and they all get spun off into the world's greatest binge-watching series. Hollywood is actually stealing from the TV playbook, or is playing by the same thing. They're thinking long-term, right? They're cultivating audiences. Yeah? So you might think of this as anti-Netflix, but it's not. It's Netflix supercharged. We worry about independence. I'll talk about that in a minute, but this is not just an indie problem. And I saw this poster of a film that's coming your way soon. Love this, because in a weird way, I'm always fascinated by Hollywood subliminally anticipates the problems of its own industry. Independence Day, resurgence. I really hope so. I really hope so. We had 20 years to prepare, and so did they. So who are we talking about there? The independents and the studios. They've been at this. But here's the thing. The studios, it's not such a great business anymore. They're making these giant things, but they're making less money from them per film. It's a big problem globally. Which is why, sorry about the resolution, that's the best resolution I could find of that picture. Some of them are really worried. And interesting enough, when I took this quote, I think it's these, this will probably play. I did not expect Paramount to be already on the block. 3 years, yeah. So Paramount's already will change hands, or a minority ownership will take place, probably a Chinese company or an internet company. Fox may well buy Warner Brothers, and Sony will disappear. So you'll have 3. But there's a natural water level, and others will come up behind them. So I want to go back to STX. So an independent company is saying, we have a great opportunity here. Hollywood is just playing the big game. Independents not getting the audience at low level. Budgets are going down too low. We'll occupy the middle. It has worked before. Right? And here's their business plan, or at least how they described it. And as I say, it was built for China. So, they realized there's 1 billion unsatisfied people, same word, in China, and 1 billion more in India, desperate for content, all true. And then they did a study of data, and we're going to talk about data now. Remember I said 2 of the forces at the beginning, globalization and technology? Well, they both could be your friend. We've seen what globalization is doing. Now we're going to talk about technology, but it has to be used correctly, and data is great, as long as you know what you're measuring and why and what you're inputting. And that hasn't always been the case. So they did some analysis on a whole bunch of 10 years worth of films in this $20 to $80 million budget range that featured a star in a signature role, and they came to this great figure of a profit margin of 24%, roughly double what the studios make. Right? So with that, and really well, they went out and raised billions of dollars for their studio, because this was, incontestable. It's inarguable, right? Well, the business case was inarguable, but let's look at the data. Here's the problem with data. Okay, and stars, what a great analogy. Okay, so right in the middle there is the nearest neighbor to the sun in red, right? Proxima Centauri. Right? So if I took this picture yesterday, right, that star, the nearest star to the sun, in red, is already 4.22 years old. That's how long, and that's the nearest star. Most of the images are hundreds of times more distant. So and this is kind of how I look at data, right? You can do all this analysis backward looking, but you're actually getting a picture, and you don't know if any of those stars have blown up in the meantime. They may well have done. We just don't know about it. We can only see this. We may feel things, but we can't see it. So you can do a snapshot of 10 years of data, but I argue it's no more a reflection of what's actually in the sky right now than that is. It's old. And why? And what, think about that. They did 10 years, whoops. Yeah. Well, they did 10 years worth of data analysis. 10 years means looking back at a time before YouTube, Facebook was around, but not nearly as dominant, Instagram, all the other things that have come in since then. So no wonder the studios were in the $20 to $80 million business and doing really well. But one thing I'm struck by this is, well, if they were doing so well in that and getting these returns, why didn't they stay in there? They're not stupid. Because the data told them people were being turned off and they were watching other things. So it's a snapshot of a business that the studios, the most successful number crunchers of all, have already got out of. So it's not really it's not actually measuring now, right? Get that? That's the downside of data. But I think it can be done intelligently. The problem with this, I believe, somebody probably knows where this is. It's somewhere in, I think, Norway. There's always been a problem with being in the middle. You get killed, as somebody says. You get killed in the middle. Joe Roth, I quote, he tried that, created his own studio, had already run Disney, and he said, the problem with living in the mid-range is you've got to have taste. That's not the only problem, right? Right now, there is hardly a week, if you're in the middle, not the low budget, if you're in the middle, when whatever film you come up with, you're trying to release it theatrically, where you're not coming up against one of those studio franchises. And heaven help you if Comcast, owning NBC and Universal, decides to, and they use this phrase, a symphony project. Symphony project means that they decide that project, and Universal, think Jurassic World and others had a fantastic year, when the whole of their empire goes behind it. Cross-marketing, you name it, every theme parks, everything, TV networks, they have it all. You're betting against the house in ways that you can't imagine. So it's not just taste, there's other things as well. But I think there are also more fundamental problems. And this goes, this is the trickiest area and it's the hardest one to measure. I think there are behavioral issues. And there's something about the film industry, you saw the picture of the anglerfish, there's something about the film industry that at certain business levels attracts a certain type of person. And sometimes good, sometimes bad, but it brings out, I was a journalist, I always used to say I love the industry covering it because it brings out the best and worst in people, often within seconds. Fantastic characters. What is it about this industry? So hubris and all the other things come into it. We can't seem to help but fall back on old habits. So, guess what? Already, and this is one of the old habits, is that you abandon the very business that you decide to get into, right? So already SDX has only released a few films, by the way, has already gone into a new business. In fact, if anything, it's probably trying to get an IPO in China. That's the business. This is a shortcut to growth. Not good for cinema. You don't want shortcuts. They're already looking at, so they said, and I love this quote. They asked us, so well, you're changing your strategy. So then the guy running it said, no, the film guy running it, not the owner, said, no. The movie side is not a loss leader exactly, but it's the flypaper for other activities. Great storytellers come to us for films, and we ultimately channel them into streaming, digital television, games, virtual reality, and the Chinese arena. That was a quick pivot. Okay. So the movie business, what kind of people does it attract? Well, calculating, impulsive, hard-nosed, hopeful, right? Or you probably need all those things, all together. This is how I see independent film investing. A familiar story. And everyone know the parable of the scorpion and the frog, right? Well, I'll quickly, for those who don't, frog is on one side of, the scorpion is on one side of the river, needs to get across, can't swim, sees a frog. And said, look, can you take me on your back? I need to get the other side. I said, yeah. But he said, by the way, you're a scorpion, right? You sting people. Me. So, I need your help. I really need your help. Trust me, da-da-da. So, hops on the back, goes across the river, goes on the other side. What happens? The scorpion then stings the frog. And the frog is dying, said, but you promised. Said, it's in my nature. That's, and it's in its nature. But here's the thing, I don't blame the scorpion in this. And you could decide who the scorpion is in this story. Is it investors or producers? It can be an either. I blame the frog for putting up with that, for believing it. Because the thing is, people want to believe in the film industry. They really do. They're so in love with what they're doing and so full of, they can't see other things. The analogy is it's one elaborate dating industry, but what other dating scenario? So, your matchmaking is what other dating scenario would you get where the moment that somebody says, yes, I like you, you jump into bed with them? And, without doing, hey, where does your money come from? Why do you like my film? All those problems then play out later. There's no due diligence. People want to believe. Other structural problems. And I'm sure everyone is familiar with this one, right? You have the world's greatest project, script is strong director, maybe hasn't made, maybe he's only made one film or a short, and you go out to the marketplace and you're looking for financing, and you've exhausted, let's say your public money sources and so on, is all contingent. You go to sales companies, and the first question they ask, they say, well, it's great, who's in it? I said, well, actually, I don't have an actor. Actually, I have this person who's great for the role. I said, yeah, but has no value overseas. They said, I said, well, who does? So actually, I'll tell you who has, George Clooney. Come back with George Clooney, and I'll finance your film. So, that's it. But I don't have the money. That's why I came to you in the first place, to afford George Clooney, and I'm not sure he really wants to be in my movie. You're going to have to solve that, because I can't pre-sell it. It's catch-22. So you need the cast to get the money, and the money says who's in it. And by the way, guilty as charged. As a journalist, there were shorthands when we used to write about projects that hadn't been made. The first thing you say, well, and you write the so-and-so project. Sometimes it was the filmmaker, if they were lucky, but often it was the actor. We use that as currency. It's problematic on so many levels. It's problematic on an economic thing, because actually the truth is, not only is that list of desirable actors very short, it changes for no real reason, and the overseas markets are about 18 months behind the US. Believe it or not, Jean-Claude Van Damme still has currency. No comment. He's good in ads. Jennifer Lawrence, you couldn't even pre-sell her name until, 2 films into her career. It just didn't register overseas. Now, of course, you can't get Jennifer Lawrence. So that's the thing. You're threading this needle all the time, trying to work out. And the other weird thing is that you're basically selling a film twice. Okay? What do I mean by that? Well, when you're packaging a film, when you're putting it together, you're trying to create a package that will appeal to the industry. You're not selling it to the audience. You're selling it to the industry with its own gatekeepers and tastes and so on. Once they get it, if you're lucky, their then job is to sell it to the audience, right? So which is then, and then in between, you've somehow got 18 months or 2 years of execution to get through, hoping that the thing that you sort of got through one end still appeals to the audience at the other end. It's really, really tough. It's probably getting tougher. And here's the paradox. There is probably more equity money available for filmmaking here, North America, and in Europe to some degree, than ever before. There's probably more money, and banks, more money than ever before waiting to get into film. But that money is more selective than ever. So it's theoretical. So we've got to crack this, all right? And this is one of the things that bugs me the most about the film industry. This is the famous Waterfall Agreement. Everyone probably familiar with this, right? So this is, to this day, and I've been covering this industry more than I many, many years. I don't actually understand this. I have no idea where I am in that picture. Business models and agreements like this, when they're devised, are pictures of somebody's version of how everyone should share equally. So in some sense, this is a view of the power structure. In other words, the negotiating power of all those people, somehow set in stone. And this is a Waterfall Agreement, right? I think this is one of the biggest culprits of it, And whoever came up with the word waterfall deserves an Oscar. All right? So the word waterfall, this is what I think of as a waterfall, okay? Now you're a producer, Remember, find out where you are in that. You're waiting for your fund receipts. Where am I? Oh, yeah, production is, ooh, wow. You're right at the bottom of that waterfall. And this is kind of generous. Yeah, this is where you are. And remember that picture of the waterfall? Well, actually is a tributary of the Colorado River. All right, so great waterfall, Colorado River. Anyone gone to the end of the Colorado River? Yeah? Yeah. This is after years of everyone taking their piece out of the Colorado River. Agriculture, industry, water, developments across America, and so on. Yeah. It doesn't even get to the sea anymore. I mean, that's what's left of that. I think that bit is the end. That's the last water trickle. That's you, I'm afraid. Now, but there's a hopeful picture. I mean, you're going to, those mountains over there, there's gold. The reason we've ended up like that is that Waterfall Agreement is a legacy of the days when the film industry was flush. There was actually more money being made by the films than the people on the take from those films. There was plenty to go around, in other words. And you may not always benefited at the end, but enough of you did, it sort of all functioned. But this was the days of, the early days of 10 years ago. So this is the days when people bought DVDs and so on. That's not happening. So we have a situation where actually there isn't enough money to go around, at least under the structure that we have, so that by the time you're at the bottom of that waterfall trickle, there's nothing left for you, right? So something has to change in this. And morally and economically, there's great reason to do that. Economically, the creative class, and that's you, has to be sustained. If you don't have the ability to keep making films, good, daring films and so on, Hollywood will run out of people to exploit. I mean, just putting it bluntly. So it's not in their interests to do this, right? Now, they've done an end run. They sort of then go to Sundance and say, hey, I like your film, make Jurassic World. Or, so right now the window between first film with a slight genre element and a major Hollywood franchise is about one film. It used to be a little longer than that. But that's not, in the end, you're going to run out of people because the Sundance films are either going to get worse or they're going to be fewer of them, and da-da-da. So this is not a good scenario. So somewhere we've got to tackle this. And one way to think about it is to then look at other industries. And most other industries would never have a waterfall agreement. They wouldn't understand it. And you imagine if you're an alien coming from another planet. And of course, every planet has its own storytelling tradition. Why would you not? So you come and arrive on Earth and say, we take your place over. We have a storytelling tradition. How do you do it down here? And you show them that, and they say, why would anyone tell stories this way? It makes no sense, Other industries do something, broadly speaking, a pie chart, a pie. You take 10% of the risk, you have 10% of the rewards. If it loses money, you're in the red for 10%. and so on and so forth. It's equitable. Everyone comes in together, and the pie grows during the cycle, right? So that, different stages of that life cycle, the pie grows and the worth grows, and you have an option to come in and out. You're stuck on the waterfall thing. You're stuck. You're waiting for an eventuality that probably will never come. And here's the other thing. In broad terms, we've got to get to what I would call a self-publishing paradigm. So what is that? Well, the people who take the risk, the creatives, and by the way, the more risk you take in film, the more of the risk you shoulder, the less likely you are to see any money. So in other words, the people who take the least risk are the ones taking the most money. That's wrong. I mean, I saw some figure, 70% of a film's income stream is taken in fees and percentages and what have you. Between distribution fees, agents, lawyers, contracts, paperwork, blah, 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 blah. So there's a whole chunk in the middle that's actually wasted money. Because imagine a world where you have a direct relationship with the audience, and you hire everyone you need on demand and keep as much control. Isn't that a much better system? Because, you wouldn't actually need to, and the music went this way, you wouldn't actually need to make as much money, but you wouldn't need to generate overall, and you could participate in this global economy. All right. So one of my day jobs is working for a tech company, and I wanted to show you some figures. So I don't really want to necessarily sell this company, Slated. That's not the purpose today, but I want to show you how a tech company thinks about the film industry, because I think it's really interesting. So the rule book there is fascinating. So it thinks like a Silicon Valley company. Dependent on data, it can be good and bad, but it can be good. But why is this of interest? What a tech company thinking? Well, and anyone who's heard me before, some of you may, but probably you've heard me talk about this before, but I've always been gripped by this. So when I left the film industry, writing about it, I wrote about other industries, tech being one of them, the whole Silicon Valley thing. And I started going to conferences, like film conferences like this, but for tech. And I was really sorry. There's something weird about this. Like, I couldn't quite work out what was different. Why does this feel so alien to me? And I thought, oh, well, actually, it's weird because everyone's so optimistic. It wasn't people on a panel saying, God, I can't tell you how difficult it was. And all of us up here, I don't know about you over there, but all of us up here, we struggled, but we've made it. And you can come up after us and talk to us about that. And that's sort of most of my film panel experiences. And so this is really, whereas you go to a tech conference, it's all about, this is what we did, and here is my blueprint for success. And I want you to participate in that. I'm going to show you all my mistakes. I'm going to show you all my investors. In fact, I'll make the introductions for you. It's a much more open thing. So I thought, oh, well, it must be a much better business, the tech business. Well, actually, it's not. So the one thing about tech, it's young, but boy, do they have data. And that's all they do, is they collect data about itself and share it as part of the same thing. So you can find out all sorts of things. And, well, I'll ask you a question. So if I was to do the Matrix thing and had a red pill and a blue pill, and in my red pill is the next, and we'll pick two outliers, the most successful things of its time. So a tech company, Facebook, the next Facebook. That's what I have. And on this one, I have the next paranormal activity, which I think is still the highest return on investment film. Instinctively, and you have more money than you could just throw away to invest, which one would you put your money into? Who would put money into paranormal activity? Okay? Who would put money into the next Facebook? Yeah. Well, here's the weird thing. The chances of either of them succeeding, let alone being outlier, it's the same. It's about 5%. In brutal terms, the chances of success is about the same, 5%. So, and you're not alone. There's more money flooding into the tech world than there is in film. So I go back to the image problem. What is going wrong? Why is one industry so optimistic and one industry so down on itself? And it's rather sort of sweeping, but what I realize is that actually, if you were to characterize the tech world, they're obsessed by that 5% chance of hitting it out of the park. So all their strategies are about that. And what kind of strategies would you do? If you only knew that 5% would succeed and that 1% would blow everyone away, well, you invest in 100. That's how you play that field. That's how you play the odds, knowing that the 5%, so you play the whole field. Now contrast that with the film world. You do the opposite. Oh, I've got a 95% chance of losing? Jesus, I better get my money out of that really, really quickly. How are you going to hedge my bet? What tax breaks can I get? So all the strategies in film, the structures, are about hedging and mitigating loss. And all the structures in the tech world, in general terms, are the opposite. It's about playing the upside, right? Which would you rather be in? It's the same world, fundamentally, and they're both highly creative, highly disruptive, and game-changing, world-changing, right? That structure, the waterfall, is an expression of everyone mitigating their loss. It's designed so that everyone in position of power can get their money out. So let's look at Slated. So it's begun by Silicon Valley types, and they look at it slightly differently, but boy, do they crunch numbers. All right, so they were given, but they did a Moneyball thing. They went to some sports statisticians working for the Yankees and said, look, we'll give you all this data, look for meaningful things. So they start crunching numbers. Turns out that it's actually a really good business in general, in aggregate. If you could invest in all 1,600 films in some way, you would come out ahead. So then you say, well, how do I do that? Well, that is a good question. Another myth, actually the profits dwarf the losses. This is actually better than tech. Because actually there, it's not clear in any given year how that works out. Sometimes it's done, but over these years, and it's only 5 years, so it's still a star problem, but And your highest return on investment, believe it or not, is for films under 5 million. And they overscore. Now then, audiences only want to see studio tentpoles. Well, this is their slide. I would slightly disagree. They probably do, but it's not what they have access to. So the vast majority of releases, the 700 and so, the 571 are independent films, and the studio releases are probably going down. So, what does this world look like? All right, so let's, for argument's sake, and I'm comfortable with this number. It's not 50,000, it's not 7,000, it's not, there are 20,000 films made each year. Okay? So how do you play this market as an investor? Okay? Well, let's see. That's the number of films that make money, profit. All right, see it? Yeah, 5%. Okay? Oh, that's the number that actually achieve theatrical distribution. That's, let's zoom in a little bit. All right, so where we are. So, not great, but if you could somehow get into the 700 field and think like Silicon Valley, you would actually be ahead. All right, so this is one of their slides. This is basically saying what I just did, which is, it's pretty much the same. And then they went further, and this is a study of portfolio investments in film, in tech, and so on. Aggregated, they're looking at 2.5 times return over the 50. Turns out it's almost exactly the same number for independent films. Uncanny. So now we're getting onto the slightly more controversial stuff. But there is, and I want to talk about it, but I want to put it in the context. You mentioned, how are you going to solve the actor problem? The catch-22. Well, one obvious answer is, well, why can't you sell the project on the strength of the project, not the actor or the cast that you haven't got? So, and Slated agrees. So they started doing what tech and data people do. They started breaking down every script they can and started scoring them on these, they also did it double blind. So in other words, you never knew who was evaluating the scripts and you didn't know what the scripts were. And they started just crunching numbers. And they do it on a 11 points scale. So it's premise, originality. Notice originality. That is actually a positive, okay? Dialogue, structure, character, logic, conflict, tone, pacing, craft, all those things. And everything gets crunched. And it's read by 3. Oh, all right, I know where I was going through. They did this, crunched numbers, came up with projections actually that do pretty well. In fact, well, this is weird. They ran all these projects through the algorithms. And those films, not all of them small, I admit. The Hollywood tracking system, average margin of error is 26%. Average margin of error during the kind of the Moneyball thing is 13%. But here's the weird thing. That 13% is 2 years before a film gets made, because it's only based on the script. You don't know anything about it, right? So that you can project from there. The 26% that the Hollywood studios do, that's 2 days before the release. You know everything about that film. In fact, in fact, the shocker is, why are you 26% off, good and bad? It's crazy. And why is a computer 13%, think about that. I'll skip through. So, let's quickly talk about Canada. And I'm sure if you have questions, we'll talk about that. On the face of it, I think you have the most amazing film and television industry. And the figures on a macro level bear this out. All right? Now, here's the father of your current premier. And there is a problem that Canada has, sorry. And that is living next to the United States. And there's an old quote from him, it's like sleeping with an elephant. No matter how friendly or temperate the beast, one is affected by every twitch and grunt. Yep. So true. And one of those things, and this kills me to this day, it killed me when I was a journalist and so on, is the phrase, the domestic box office. Why? Why is domestic equal US and Canada? Those things should be separated out. You have 10% of the marketplace and admissions. Sometimes you get higher in depending on currency and so on. You account for that. You are giving, because the rest of the world forgets that domestic also equals Canada, they very rarely write North America. It's too long, so they write domestic. Domestic equals US. You're giving 10% of marketing PR to the US for free every week in your box office. You go and see their films, and they get to claim you as their own. And just to give you a sense of why that's important, I said that China would eclipse the US next year, the domestic market. That's true. But if you remove Canada, it's already bigger than the US. China is the biggest single territory market on the planet right now. But I guess the MPAA don't really want that. They haven't come to terms with that yet. So, separate. The figures have to be separate. There is an identity issue. I asked I did a class recently. I asked them how many people thought these were Canadian, and they got Revenant. And the irony there is that a lot of it wasn't shot in Canada because they ran out of snow, right? So, but they're all Canadian, and they rightfully so. And if they were other countries, they would be claimed. Here, everyone's ambivalent. Faces. All right, so these are all Canadian. You probably know that, right? So the most successful filmmaker of all time is Canadian. One of the most successful TV people is Canadian. These actors. She was in Spotlight. And by the way, Spotlight, which was obviously Boston, was also largely controlled by a Canadian company, right? Three of the founding fathers and mothers of Hollywood were also Canadian. So Jack Warner, Mary Pickford, and Louis B. Mayer, but admittedly he came very young as a kid and then ended up in Canada. And then, so there's nothing wrong with Canadian talent. In fact, you have all the skills in this country. But, I listen to panel discussions, and there's a slight sort of apologetic air. Yeah. This is why, this is, to me, the global face of Canadian cinema. So, as far as I know, there are only 2 women directors who were nominated for an Oscar this year. Female. One of them, the only one who actually won, is Canadian. And you have this great Mexican filmmaker on your doorsteps, living a whole bunch of his time in Toronto, making films in Canada where possible. You are part of the global economy. I love this phrase, Hollywood North. It says everything that's wrong about the thing. Why didn't they not talk about the US as being Canada South? Right? Think about that. So I think that Canada should play to its strengths. And just to wrap up, so on the way in, I was flying this morning, Air Canada, got my Globe and Mail, hurriedly went to the arts section, and these are the quotes that I got. These are, different things, and I love this. So, about the Canadian Screen Awards, this journalist, and I don't know if she's in the room or something, but, and a lot of it actually I agree with, but look at the language. The conundrum of celebrating an entertainment industry that's permanently on life support. Really? There were 40 films shot in Vancouver last year. It was near capacity. Even the Canadian Screen Awards' most ardent supporters make terrible dying animal sounds. Please. The Best Picture nominees are always nuts. By the way, they win Oscars. They're not nuts. Yeah. And then Helga Stevenson, bless her, I've hurriedly wrote this. She's right. We're not great at this, she says. And by that she meant the marketing and self-promotion. But we're going to get there. There's an apologetic air. Of course it's going to get there. In fact, marketing and self-marketing, self-promotion. And we just went to the panel here, and it said, after a few episodes of this, series, of the show, they finally got round to actually maybe putting the CN Tower into a shot. And here's the thing. It is a generic North American city. And as I said today beforehand, I'm waiting for when Vancouver gets obliterated by aliens. That's when you're in, But why is it they only attack Empire State Building, Brooklyn Bridge, Golden Gate Bridge, and the Hollywood sign? You need to get your things blown up. And then this, as a sort of kicker, I read the review of Cloverfield 10, I think it's called. And in it, the reviewer quite simply said, he had a go at J.J. Abrams', I love this phrase, brilliant but annoying flair for marketing. If it's brilliant marketing, it shouldn't be annoying. It should be all about marketing and self-promotion and so on. And that's, Anyway, I'll finish there because my time's up. Thank you.